Chess YouTube, what is happening? So in this video, because Vladimir Kramnik, the former world champion, because he's in the news right now for all the wrong reasons, I thought, you know what? Let's look at a game where Magnus Carlsen, the GOAT, simply eviscerates Vladimir with one of the most disrespectful openings of all time at the highest level. Let's dive right in. All right, Vladimir in the game opens one knight f3 and Magnus 1g6, the modern defense. But don't worry, it gets way worse than this in this 2012 tall Memorial Blitz game between these two players. All right, Vladimir, e4 is the move, then bishop g7, d4, d6, and then finally bishop c4 by Vladimir, the former world champion. Now this move is very, very strong against the modern defense. The idea is if black does go, for example, knight to f6, then you go queen to e2 with the queen behind the bishop, threatening e5 ideas later in the game. For example, knight f6, queen e2, and this setup by white is very, very strong, and black's under a tremendous amount of pressure here. Now instead, in the game, Magnus, he goes a6, intending a very fast b5 advance, heading for the Tiger's Modern, which is actually a very trendy opening for black in general. From here, Vladimir, he castles, we have b5, bishop b3, and finally bishop b7, completing the Tiger's Modern setup with these two fianchetto bishops on b7 and g7. Now, this setup by black is very trendy. It's very popular. You have pressure on d4 and e4, and it's very flexible in general and quite good in blitz games. Now, here, Vladimir, he's unfazed. His pawn on e4 is under attack. Rook to e1 is the move defending. Now, here, Magnus, in this position, you would expect, for example, knight f6 and castles and so on. But oh no, in this game, he's busting out the disrespect with the move e6. This is the key move in this game. What is Magnus doing? It's simple. He's not bringing this knight to f6. Oh no, it's going to e7. Magnus going for the Hippopotamus Opening with knights on e7 and d7, which looks absolutely absurd. It's sort of the weird cousin of Anna Kramnik's cow opening. And this is what you play when you want to absolutely disrespect Vladimir at the highest levels. All right, Vladimir here. He can do literally whatever he wants. Black's putting no pressure on white. For example, white can go e5 here. He can go d5 here. He can go c4 here. He can go a4 here, as he did in the game. a4 on the board, attacking b5, trying to open up this a file to his benefit. But black, unfazed, knight d7, supporting the rook on the a8 square. Black here is still doing pretty okay out of the opening, despite playing the Hippopotamus Opening. All right, Vladimir, bishop g5, developing plus attacking, a solid move, but black, knight d7, completing the formation. Black here getting exactly what he wants in this game, the awkward, weird opening, which is just enough to throw Vladimir off in this game. All right, here, Vladimir, he takes on b5, a takes, then rook takes and bishop takes, or sorry, queen takes. White here giving up control of the a file, and suddenly black having a decent amount of pressure on that weak pawn on the e4 square. And what is Vladimir going to do about it? Well, in the game, he goes d5, but this turns out to be the first mistake of the game for Vladimir. Instead, simply knight c3, targeting b5, defending e4, was the right way forward here. Instead, d5, but again, this move, it weakens this diagonal, and suddenly b2 is under attack, and black has the option of trading on b2 immediately if he wants to. But now here, Magnus, he does not trade on b2 yet. Instead, he finds a much stronger idea. That is simply the move knight to c5. A very, very good multi-purpose idea. The idea being you defend e6. e6 was under attack by the pawn and the bishop, but it is no more. Beyond that, you pressure the bishop on b3, as well as the pawn on the e4 square. This knight is just a monster in this position, controlling literally all of the key squares in the position, and there's no way to attack it. The b pawn here is blocked. That knight is just going to sit there as long as it wants. All right, Vladimir, this guy is no joke. I mean, he sort of is these days, but back then in 2012, he was no joke at least, and plays the move knight d4, centralizing, defending b3, attacking a6, a very solid move. Now here, Magnus, h6, pushing back the bishop. Now, very importantly, here, Vladimir, he has the option of trading on e7 with the bishop. Would that be a good idea? After all, if you do that, black must take back with the king, and from there, black cannot castle. But it turns out if you do that, somehow, some way, the black position is quite robust, and black is doing just fine here. He might even have the edge in this middle game. Now, instead here, white can also go back to, say, e3 and develop and do whatever else he wants, but instead, in the game, Vladimir, he does trade on e7. We have bishop takes, then king takes, and again, it seems so weird. How is this bomb cloud style move okay for black in this position? But it turns out the king here is quite safe on e7. I mean, go figure. Now here, Vladimir, he takes on b5. Knight takes b5, attacking c7 as well, a good move. But here, Magnus, queen to a5, pressuring the knight, defending c7, pressuring rook e1, which could be very important. Now the queen is tied to the defense of the rook. The queen cannot go to, say, f3 or any other square like that. Now here, Vladimir, knight 1 to c3. He defends, blocks the attack, and so on. But now Magnus, rook to b8, threatening various ideas here. Maybe taking on d5 twice, then b5, and so on. Magnus here piling up the threats in this game. Now, Vladimir, he takes on e6. We have d takes, then f takes, then knight d4, dropping back and pressuring e6. But Magnus here, he trades on b3. We have knight takes, and then queen b4, threatening the e4 pawn. And again, Magnus here, just sort of piling up the pressure slowly but surely, threatening c3, taking twice, and so on. He can kind of do whatever he wants here. Vladimir, despite having a very solid classical game, is under quite a bit of pressure. And now here, Vladimir, on move 20, he finally chokes in this game. He plays the move queen to g4. Now, this move here looks so logical. I mean, pressuring g6, pressuring e6, and so on. But the problem here is it gives up control of c3 as well as the rook on the e1 square. Magnus here, he does not defend g6. Oh no, instead, he attacks on c3. We have bishop takes, b takes, queen takes, pressuring the weak rook on e1, and suddenly there is no time to take on g6, as then you lose the rook and you get checkmated on the e1 square immediately. Therefore, here, rook e3 attacks the queen, but now queen takes c2, takes the free pawn, pressures b3, and beyond that, pressures the e1 square. Again, if white takes on g6, queen to e1 would lead to checkmate immediately. Therefore, here, white's got to go h3, giving the king some loft on the h2 square if it needs it. But now, rook to f8. Magnus Carlsen, this guy is relentless, targeting f2 now, threatening the king and the rook. All right, from here, Vladimir, he bails out to a somewhat equal-ish endgame with a shocking move at first glance, but there is a very obvious tactical idea behind it. He plays the move queen takes e6, the queen sack, which is not really a queen sack. Of course, the idea, you deflect the king to e6 and then play the fork knight d4, winning back the queen on the spot. So Vladimir finding a very elementary tactic, but very, very solid one. Queen takes, knight d4, king moves, and knight takes c2. And suddenly, we find ourselves in an endgame. Now, of course, black here has the option of taking that free pawn on e4. But of course, the pawn here is poisoned. If you take it, f3 wins the bishop, as the bishop would be pinned to the king on e5. Therefore, instead, Magnus c5 is the move, gaining space. The pass pawn must be pushed. Magnus here, his plan is very, very simple. Push this pass pawn down the board as quickly as humanly possible, while still keeping it safe, of course. All right, Vladimir, knight e1. The idea being trying to regroup this knight to a better square, perhaps f3, perhaps d3. One of these squares would be quite good for him in this game. Now, rook to a8. Magnus here, reactivating his rook on the a file, threatening rook a1 ideas, which of course would pin the knight on the e1 square to the king on the g1 square. From here, knight d3 hits the king d4, the king marches forward, e5, trying to sort of soften up these pawns on the d6 and the c5 squares and trying to get some activity in this game. Of course, now if black takes on e5, white takes back with, say, the knight, threatens g6 and so on, and suddenly gets some play in this game. Therefore, instead, Magnus, he ignores the pawn on e5 entirely and plays the counterattacking idea of c4, pushing back this knight on d3. Now here, we have knight f4, then d takes e5, which turns out to be, for tactical reasons, a slightly dubious idea here. The problem is the rook on the a8 square is going to be vulnerable. Here's why. Instead, rook a1 was the right move, hits the king, and then you take. Now, here is the reason why. You know what? Try and figure out why taking on e5 right away was not the right move here by black, was a little bit of a mistake in this endgame, in this blitz game between Magnus and Vladimir. And now here's the proof in the pudding. Here's why rook to a1 check was required before d takes e5. The reason is here, white has the option of going knight to e6, hitting the king. And now, if the king marches forward to say d5, then knight c7 hits the rook and the king. The rook, of course, being vulnerable on the a8 square. If it were on a1, that would not be possible. Now, fortunately here, for Magnus, for us, in this video where Vladimir gets absolutely eviscerated, he doesn't find this. Instead, knight to e2 is the move. He drops back with the knight, hits the king, but this is much, much weaker. And Magnus here, he begins to pull away in this endgame. King d5 is the move. Knight c3 hits the king. King to e6 drops back. Now f4 trying to attack the pin piece on e5. But Magnus, he simply goes e4. He knows if this heads to a rook endgame, he has the edge here, as that pawn on c4 is simply too strong. Here, Vladimir, king to f2 is the move, but now bishop c6. Magnus is in absolutely no rush. He knows the pass pawn on c4 is just too much. Finally, Vladimir here, he does trade on e4. We have knight takes, but then rook to a2 hits the king, king g3, and then king to d5, getting out of the way of the discovered attack by the rook. And here, Magnus, in just a couple of moves, goes from slightly better to absolutely, completely winning in this game. That pawn on c4 is simply unstoppable. Vladimir, knight to f6, hits the king, king d4, rook e6 hits the bishop. Rook takes g2, wins the free pawn on the g2 square, and attacks the king. And of course, the rook being defended by the bishop on c6. The king's got to move, king to h4. Now bishop f3, knight g4, c3. The pawn march continues. Rook d6 hits the king. King c5 hits the rook. Rook d8. And now rook takes g4. The final brilliant move of the game. This is a formal rook sack, but here is the problem. After rook takes, h takes c2, Vladimir resigns, as if you give the check trying to attack the pawn, black simply goes bishop c6, blocking the attack, and there's nothing you can do to stop the pawn. Of course, rook to d1 doesn't work either, as then you just take the rook and win the game. So for that reason, right here, after c2, Vladimir Kramnik, the guy who, I mean, no one's really a fan of right now after what happened to Daniel, he has to resign on the spot to Magnus Carlsen. Wow, what a game between Magnus and Vladimir in this 2012 Blitz game in the Tau Memorial Blitz Tournament. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash the like button, comment down below, and real fast, announcement, I am reopening my one-on-one coaching program. If you want to work with me directly, one-on-one, and have one-on-one calls with me, where I can help you get screaming fast results with your online chess, the link's down below. Just apply, and if you're a good fit, we'll talk and go from there. And if you're not a good fit, I do have a free online chess community where I have free courses, free group coaching, free support, and so on. It's drmikechess.com. If you're simply not ready for my one-on-one program, you can go there and get better at chess very, very fast. We have 900 plus people there, all striving to reach 1,000 to 2,000 plus ELO. It's a great community, so I'll see you there. And as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond, and I'll see you in the next video.